it's Amanda. Welcome back to my Book Nook. So today we are going to be talking about The Shadows by Alex North. So we got another horror thriller type book to discuss this time. Basic premise behind it, you have your main character Paul Adams. He returns to his hometown as his mother goes into hospice with dementia, and she alludes to problems relating to a crime that two of his friends, Charlie Crabtree and Billy Roberts, committed when they were children, which after that crime had happened, Charlie disappeared. While that's all going on, you have your secondary main character, a detective named Amanda Beck, who is in a nearby town who is dealing with a very similar crime in which two school-aged children murdered a friend of theirs. And her aspect of it, when she starts to realize from looking at message boards the connection not only to the Charlie Crabtree murder, but also other murders where they also start referencing a person named Red Hands, who you do find out through flashbacks with Paul, is also someone that Charlie had talked about, was this person named Red Hands. Storyline moves on, you learn more about Paul and his side of things, especially since you have a lot of now and then scenes going on. You have a bunch of scenes that are happening with Paul in today, especially in regards to looking at the stuff that his mom had alluded to before she passes, but also learning the history of him and his friends, which Charlie was one of them, and that whole aspect of it. And you have Amanda's research into what happened with these boys until the two storylines fully converge. There's a lot of times of overlap where Amanda is looking into these people and is like, okay, this is so weird, people keep dying. Overall, wasn't my favorite book. I give it a 6.5 out of 10. I'm going to explain the two biggest issues I had with it that actually knocked its points down quite a bit. The first one is a writing style thing. Like I said, you have your two main characters, and I've read a lot of books. You can do things which have multiple main characters. You can do a third-person omnipresent point of view. You could do the third-person limited point of view, but each chapter you make it clear which is the character that you are following. You could do a first-person point of view with both characters having the first person following the same thing, of making it clear which character is the one that you're following. Especially since with Paul's chapters, they're already marking whether or not they happen now or before. It really wouldn't have made a lot of difference if you had that whole concept of, hey, we're doing Paul now. Hey, we're doing Amanda. We're doing Paul before. This would have worked. The writing choice that Alex North made that I did not like, and I do not like this in any book that I read, is he would flip point of view. Any chapter that was dealing with Paul was always written in first-person point of view, whereas any chapter dealing with Amanda was written in third-person point of view. I really don't like those flow of point of view switches. There's a way to keep your same point of view without being, and still make it clear who it is that is your main character, your main aspect for these chapters. I really didn't like it. If you wanted to just do the one person's point of view, he could have just not done the Amanda stuff and just had it be the Paul aspect, and brought in with Amanda with the fact that she does cross into his life when she's investigating these other murders. That would have worked. It wasn't the choice made, and it was something that I did not like. The other thing I didn't like, I'm just going to give the basic thing with, because to go fully in depth with it is going to be part of the more spoilery aspect, which will be starting really soon. This book used a trope that I've started coming across with some of the horror that I've been newly reading that I'm not the biggest fan of. And I'm going to explain what it is by talking about a horror trope that I do enjoy. So the horror trope that I do enjoy is the real evil is other people. You see this a lot in a bunch of the books that I read, in which you have your supernatural, your paranormal element. And yeah, it's bad. It's not a good thing going on. But because it's there, the dark side of humanity starts coming, and you need to be afraid of the paranormal. You need to be afraid of the supernatural. It will kill you too, but so might the other people that you're there with. I like that trope. That's a great trope because they're using that horror construct of the paranormal, the supernatural, to show the darkness that humanity can keep in themselves. The trope that Shadows used, and a few other books that I've read recently has used that I'm not the biggest fan of, is the mundane explanation for the supernatural, paranormal happenings that were going on being the basis for everything. And with that, we'll go into the now spoilery aspect of the book. So we're going to first talk with Amanda's storyline, because it's kind of the smaller one, which makes sense. And in that storyline, Amanda gets called out to a murder that had happened of a middle schooler that was committed by two of his friends. The two friends start talking about the Charlie Crabtree murders, and she starts doing investigations. She finds a message board in which this is talked about, along with other murders that had happened in various other small towns around where they are. All the same type of thing, in which it's two to three school kids killing another school child, and a lot of them reference this whole red hands thing. Through these message boards that the boys had gone on, they also were communicating with people who said they knew a lot about the Charlie Crabtree murders. So she's going down the investigation line, and this is how she intersects with the Paul storyline, because one of the people that she tries to talk to, Billy Roberts, he was one of the other, he and Charlie were the two kids that had committed the murder that Paul knows about. Billy's dead. She also eventually goes to talk to Paul because he's really the only other link that she has. So now we're going to jump into more Paul's storyline. So Paul goes, like I said, his mother is in hospice with dementia, and she starts talking about things being in the house. She has information in the house, and he needs to be careful and everything. He goes to the house, sees red handprints on the wall, and meets up with another school friend of his named Jenny. Starts talking with her and everything, and we get a lot of, and so that's some of this now stuff, and he's talking about the things that he's going on, his life, how his mom wanted him to become a writer, that kind of fell through, all this other things, that his lofty goals that he just hasn't really reached yet. During the course of this, his mother does end up dying. Before she dies, she reminds him to be very careful about the words. A lot of his before sections are dealing with his friendships with Charlie, Billy, and James. And Charlie starts us all off about talking about these dreams that he's having, which then proceeds to Billy and him talking, they're sharing the same dreams, because he's like, we can do this whole dream sharing thing. And then they bring James into this whole thing with doing this dream sharing thing, and Paul's just like, you guys are being weird. I don't get this. Why are we doing this? Eventually, they convince Paul to keep a dream journal and do all this type of stuff in which they're all sharing these dreams and whatnot. And Paul is really, this whole time, thinking it's a load of crap. Because a lot of times what would happen is they would look at one person's dream journal and everyone else will remember, oh yeah, we had the exact same dream going on and everything. At one point, Charlie's like, yeah, we had this dream. We ended up killing our gym teacher who's a dick's dog. And it was Red Hands that did it. And we gotta be able to make Red Hands manifest in the world. And of course, the way they make Red Hands manifest in the world is by committing a murder of another school child. You find out as time goes on that Jenny isn't really there. It's basically been a manifestation of Paul's mind. He makes it clear he always knew Jenny wasn't there. He doesn't think she's a ghost or anything like that. It was just part of his way of dealing with everything that had happened with regards to Charlie. Jenny was the person that Billy and Charlie ended up murdering. It was not the original intended target. The original intended target was going to be James Dreyer, the other friend. So when Paul figured this out, he warned James. James didn't show up. Billy and Charlie ended up grabbing Jenny and killing her. James ends up eventually telling his hands about what had happened. Charlie shows up at the house. Charlie ends up dead, hence his disappearance, and is buried out in the woods. James finds this all out from reading his mother's journals, in which she was told this by James's dad. So basically, the whole supernatural thing about this whole red hands and something possessing these kids and making them do this thing and then taking one of them away, which was the whole thing that they thought happened with Charlie, didn't happen. It never talks about, it never really explains what or who Red Hands is, so it keeps this whole, it's just a thing the kids made up kind of concept that just keeps getting passed down and along in all these types of message boards or hanging out. It became an urban legend that the kids who decide they're gonna do the same type of thing and we're gonna do something for it. Kind of like how those two girls decided they were going to kill one of their friends for Slender Man. It's an urban legend that kids decide to blow out of proportion with. And then the other supernatural aspect of it with the kid disappearing is because he was killed by his original intended victim's parents. He eventually gets found of Charlie, by Amanda. There's a lot of other, you have the end of the legal stuff and whatnot. But honestly, by the point that happened, I finished the book. I didn't care anymore at that point because, like I said, I don't like that trope. When you're writing horror, when you're writing thriller, if you want to make it be that the people are the issue, you can do that. Thrillers, psychological thrillers are a huge thing. The concept of people being evil and people doing the bad thing is a huge, huge thing. If you want to do the supernatural paranormal thing, do it. And if you want to still have the humans being evil, you can keep those two combined. This is the second book that I can think of off the top of my head in the last couple of months that I've read that has carried on the same trope. I really, really do not like it. So, yeah, that's why I gave it as low as I did. It wasn't a poorly written book. It had a writing aspect I didn't like. It was an intriguing read until it threw in a trope that I didn't like. But, hey, it, like I said, wasn't a bad book. I did not have to put it in my did not finish pile. But it was not my favorite. It's one of the books that if I end up needing more book space, it's going to end up getting donated because I would rather read it for a book that I may prefer better. But I got a question for you guys that we can talk about in the comments. This book made me talk about a trope that I really didn't like, and in regards, the flip side of it, a trope that I really do like in regards to horror at least. So, what are some of your favorite and least favorite tropes that you come across in your books that you read? Let's have a conversation about that, and maybe one week if we get a lot of different types of things going on about that, it can be a thing that I talk about. Hey, let's go over different tropes that pop up and I can do a little talk about my opinions on them, but I'm gonna need you guys to give me some of your tropes that you'd enjoy hearing. What do I think of them? Alright? So yeah, thank you for listening, and I'll see you with the next book. Bye everyone!